The sterile white walls of the delivery room were closing in the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, a drumbeat to a tragedy. Annalise Blackwood, her face a pale mask of sweat and exhaustion, gave one last desperate push. In the corner, her husband's mistress, Victoria, watched with an unnerving calm, a predator waiting for the kill. As a baby's first cry filled the suffocating silence, Annalise's last breath escaped her lips. And through the haze of grief, a flicker of a smile touched Victoria's perfect lips. It was a smile of triumph, a smile that said, "It's all mine now." But she hadn't counted on the one secret a dying woman had left behind. The air in Suite 714 of the Lenox Hill Hospital was thick with the metallic scent of fear and antiseptic. It clung to the plush faux mahogany furniture and the tastefully abstract art on the walls, amenities designed to disguise the raw primal reality of birth as a luxury experience. But no amount of money could silence the frantic, erratic rhythm of the fetal heart monitor or erase the exhaustion etched onto Annalise Blackwood's face. For 18 hours, she had been in a battle, not just to bring a life into the world, but to keep her own from slipping away. Jonathan Blackwood stood by the large window, his 6'3" frame rigid, his bespoke Tom Ford suit looking absurdly out of place. He stared out at the sprawling panorama of New York City's Upper East Side, but he saw none of it. His world had shrunk to the four walls of this room, to the shallow, ragged breaths of his wife. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, the gesture doing nothing to soothe the tremor in his fingers. He was a man accustomed to control a titan of finance who could move markets with a single phone call. Yet here he was, utterly powerless. Annalise's voice, a reedy whisper, cut through his tormented thoughts. "Jonathan, is she still here?" He didn't need to ask who she was. He turned from the window, his gaze falling on the woman seated demurely in the corner of the suite's small waiting area, just beyond the glass partition. Victoria Vance. Her name tasted like ash in his mouth. She was the picture of concerned grace, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her Chanel suit a study in understated wealth. She offered a small, sympathetic smile whenever a nurse bustled past. A stranger might have mistaken her for a devoted sister or a close family friend. Jonathan knew better. She was a vulture circling, waiting. "She won't leave Annalise," he said, his voice low and gravelly. He moved to the bedside, taking his wife's clammy hand in his. It felt as fragile as a bird's wing. "I've asked her. Her driver is waiting downstairs. She insists on being here for support." A dry, mirthless sound, barely a cough, escaped Annalise's lips. "Support. She's here to measure the drapes on my coffin." Her eyes, once a vibrant cornflower blue, were now clouded with pain and a weary, profound sadness. They flickered towards the door. "She thinks she's won. She thinks she'll have you the company, the penthouse, and now my baby." "Don't say that," Jonathan commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. We'll take our daughter home to the nursery you designed. His voice broke. The promises felt like lies, hollow and brittle. The obstetrician, Dr. Miller, had been blunt an hour ago. Preeclampsia severe. Her blood pressure was skyrocketing. Her liver function was plummeting. An emergency cesarean section was now the only option, a high-risk procedure for a woman in her fragile state. Annalise had insisted on waiting, on trying to deliver naturally, a stubborn, desperate hope that Jonathan knew was fading with every tick of the clock. The affair had been a colossal mistake, a symptom of a deep-seated arrogance Jonathan hadn't recognized in himself until it was too late. It had started a year ago, a meaningless dalliance with Victoria, a junior vice president at a rival firm. She was ambitious, beautiful, and utterly ruthless. She had seen Jonathan not as a man, but as a prize, an acquisition. He had ended it months ago, the moment he and Annalise found out they were finally miraculously pregnant after years of heartbreaking failures. He had confessed everything to Annalise, begging for a forgiveness he didn't deserve. Annalise, with the quiet strength that had always defined her, had forgiven him. They had been rebuilding piece by painstaking piece, their shared joy over their impending daughter, the glue that was holding them together. But Victoria hadn't accepted the dismissal. She had become a shadow, a constant, unwelcome presence. She appeared at his charity galas at his favorite restaurants. She sent cloying saccharine texts about hoping Annalise was well. And when Annalise had been admitted to the hospital with complications 2 days ago, Victoria had simply appeared a porcelain statue of feigned concern that no one had the heart to forcibly remove. She was playing a long game, and the finish line was, she believed, in sight. "Jonathan." Annalise whispered, her grip on his hand tightening. "The box. In my closet. Behind the shoe racks. You promise me, no matter what happens, you promise me you'll open that box." "Nothing is going to happen," he insisted, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. "We'll open it together when we get home." "Promise me." She repeated, a new urgency in her tone. Her eyes locked on his, pleading, commanding. "I promise," he choked out, leaning down to kiss her damp forehead. Just then, Dr. Miller swept back into the room, his face grim. He was followed by a team of nurses and an anesthesiologist. The time for waiting was over. "Mr. Blackwood," the doctor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We have to take her now. Her system is failing. It's the baby's best chance, and frankly, it's hers too." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Jonathan. He looked at Annalise, at her terrified eyes, and nodded numbly. As the medical team began prepping her, moving with practiced, urgent efficiency, his gaze was drawn once more to the glass partition. Victoria was standing now. Her hands were pressed together as if in prayer, her face a perfect mask of worried solicitude. But her eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on Annalise. And for a fleeting, terrifying second, as the nurses began to wheel Annalise's bed towards the operating room, Jonathan saw it. The mask slipped. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of Victoria's lips. It was a victor's smile, and it chilled him to the bone. He felt a primal rage surge within him, a desperate need to protect the woman he loved from the predator who was already celebrating her demise. But he was swept along in the tide of medical emergency, his wife's weakening hand slipping from his grasp as they rushed her through the double doors, leaving him alone in the silent, waiting storm. The operating room was a different world. It was colder, brighter, a universe of stainless steel, and the low hum of life-sustaining machinery. Jonathan, clad in sterile blue scrubs that felt like a flimsy costume, stood where a nurse had positioned him near Annalise's head. A drape had been erected, a stark blue barrier separating him from the grim reality of the surgery. He could only see her face ashen against the white pillow, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I love you so much, Annalise. Just hold on. For me. For our daughter." She tried to smile, a weak quiver of her lips. Tell her I loved her more than my own life." "You'll tell her yourself," he said, a desperate lie. The anesthesiologist spoke in a calm, reassuring monotone, explaining the epidural, the sensations she would feel. Jonathan held her hand, anchoring himself to her touch, as the methodical, detached voices of the surgeons floated over the drape. Scalpel, suction, blood pressure is dropping. Each phrase was a hammer blow to his heart. He tried to talk to her, to keep her focused. He spoke of their future, of the trip to the Amalfi Coast they had planned, of teaching their daughter to ride a bike in Central Park. He painted a picture of a life that felt with every passing second like a fantasy slipping through his fingers. Annalise's responses grew fainter, her eyelids fluttering. "Stay with me, darling," he pleaded. "Just a little longer." Suddenly, the tone in the room shifted. A new urgency crackled in the air. "Doctor," Miller's voice, previously calm, was now sharp-clipped. "We're losing her. BP is 60/30 and falling. She's hemorrhaging." More alarms began to sound, a cacophony of electronic shrieks that signaled catastrophe. Nurses moved faster, their faces tense. Jonathan felt a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you may want to step back." "No!" He roared, his grip on Annalise's hand tightening. "I'm not leaving her." He saw the panic in her eyes now, the clear, unadulterated fear of the end. Her lips moved, forming his name. "Jonathan, I'm here. I'm right here." Over the din, he heard another sound, a thin, wavering cry that cut through the chaos. Their baby. She was here. A nurse, her face beaming despite the tension, held up a small, wriggling bundle over the drape for a fleeting moment. "It's a girl, Mr. Blackwood. A beautiful, healthy girl." Tears streamed down Jonathan's face, tears of joy and terror mingling. He looked from the newborn to his wife. A flicker of life returned to Annalise's eyes as she heard the cry. She turned her head, a monumental effort, trying to see her child. "Let me see her," she rasped. The nurse, sensing the gravity of the moment, quickly wrapped the baby and brought her to Annalise's side, placing the tiny, screaming infant on her mother's chest. For one perfect, heartbreaking moment, the chaos ceased. Annalise looked down at her daughter. Her hand, trembling, lifted to touch the baby's downy hair. A look of pure, transcendent love transformed her face, erasing the pain and the fear. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm your mommy." She looked at Jonathan, her eyes conveying a universe of love, regret, and final instructions. Protect her, Jonathan. From her. He knew exactly who she meant. Then it happened. The main monitor beside her bed let out a long, continuous, soul-shattering beep. Annalise's eyes rolled back. Her hand fell from the baby. "She's in V-fib. Get the crash cart. Charge to 200. Miller yelled. A nurse gently but firmly lifted the baby from Annalise's chest as another shoved Jonathan aside. "Sir, you need to leave now." The scene devolved into a blur of controlled panic. They were compressing her chest, shouting medical jargon. He saw the paddles saw her body jolt violently. Once, twice. The flat line on the monitor remained an unwavering horizontal green line, a testament to finality. Dr. Miller looked at the clock, then at his team. He let out a long, defeated sigh. Death. 42 a.m. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, meaningless vibrations in the air. He saw them cover Annalise's face with the sheet. He saw the nurses turning off the screaming machines one by one, plunging the room into an eerie, respectful silence, broken only by the soft cries of the newborn being tended to in a corner. Dead. The word slammed into him, a physical blow that buckled his knees. Annalise. His Annalise. The woman he had loved since college, the moral compass of his life, the beautiful, vibrant soul who had just given her last breath to bring their child into the world. Gone. A profound, bottomless emptiness opened up inside him. He was adrift in a silent, cold cosmos. He didn't know how long he stood there, frozen, staring at the still form under the blue sheet. Eventually, a nurse led him out of the operating room and into a small, private waiting area. And there, rising from a chair as he entered, was Victoria. Her face was a mask of sorrow. Her eyes were wide, her hand covering her mouth in a gesture of shock. She rushed towards him, her arms outstretched. "Jonathan, oh my God, I am so sorry," she murmured, her voice laced with a perfect imitation of grief. "I can't imagine what you're going through." She tried to embrace him, but he flinched away, as if from a hot iron. He looked into her eyes, searching for a single genuine tear, a flicker of real empathy. He found none. All he could see was the reflection of his own shattered world, and behind it, a cold, triumphant gleam. She was sorry for the inconvenience of his grief, not the cause of it. She was sorry she had to pretend to be sad. "The baby," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. She's perfect." Victoria said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming brighter, more proprietary. "I've already spoken to the nurse. 7 pounds 2 ounces. They're just getting her cleaned up. Our little girl is a fighter." The word hit him like a slap. He stared at her, at the woman who had haunted his wife's final months, the woman Annalise had warned him against with her dying breath. Victoria stood there, already positioning herself seamlessly, attempting to slide into the space left by Annalise's cooling body. She was laying claim to his daughter, to his life. And as he looked at her perfectly composed face, her subtle, self-satisfied smirk thinly veiled by a performance of sorrow, he felt the first stirrings of a cold, hard resolve solidifying around his broken heart. He had made a promise to his dying wife. Protect her. From her. And Jonathan Blackwood always kept his promises. The days that followed were a surreal blur of grief and paperwork. The Blackwood penthouse on Park Avenue, once a vibrant home, filled with Annalise's laughter and the scent of the peonies she adored, became a cavern of echoing silence. Sympathy cards piled up on the marble entryway table. The phone rang incessantly with calls from well-meaning friends and distant relatives, their voices a drone of practiced condolences that Jonathan could barely process. He moved through it all, like a ghost, an automaton going through the motions. He signed papers for the funeral home, selected a casket, and wrote a eulogy that felt like a pathetic reduction of a magnificent life. His only moments of clarity of grounding came when he was in the nursery. Annalise had designed it herself. It was a masterpiece of soft grays and pale yellows, with a hand-painted mural of whimsical woodland creatures on one wall. Everything was perfect, waiting for an occupant who would now never know her mother. Jonathan would stand by the crib looking down at his daughter, whom he had named Lily, just as Annalise had wanted. Lily Blackwood. She had her mother's shock of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, the same piercing blue gaze. In her, he saw Annalise's legacy, the last precious piece of his wife he had left. He felt a fierce, terrifying wave of love and protectiveness that was so intense it physically hurt. Victoria, meanwhile, orchestrated her takeover with chilling efficiency. She was a constant, unnerving presence in his home, having somehow dismissed his housekeeper for the week to give the poor woman a rest. She answered the door, screened his calls, and spoke to the caterers for the wake in a low, authoritative whisper. She wore Annalise's favorite cashmere robe around the apartment, a sight that made Jonathan's stomach churn. She was not mourning. She was nesting. She treated Lily with a cloying, performative affection. "Oh, look at our sweet angel," she would coo, reaching into the bassinet in the living room. "She has your determined chin, Jonathan." She referred to the baby constantly as our girl, a verbal land grab that grated on Jonathan's every nerve. His family, his parents and sister, flew in from Chicago. They were circumspect around Victoria, their polite, Midwestern sensibilities clashing with the blatant impropriety of her presence. They saw the truth in Jonathan's haunted eyes, but didn't know how to breach the subject. The day of the funeral was cold and gray, the weather a perfect mirror of Jonathan's soul. St. James's Church was filled to capacity with New York's elite bankers, socialites, and politicians all there to pay their respects to Annalise, a woman universally loved for her genuine warmth and grace. Jonathan stood at the front, holding Lily, who was mercifully quiet, wrapped tightly in a white blanket. Victoria sat in the front pew beside him. She had dressed in a severe but exquisitely tailored black dress, a delicate veil failing to hide the smug satisfaction in her eyes. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support for the watching crowd. He wanted to shake it off, to scream at her to get away from him, but the crushing weight of public grief held him in place. After the service, they returned to the penthouse for the wake. The apartment filled with dark suits and somber dresses, the air thick with the scent of lilies and catered food. Jonathan moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting condolences, his daughter, a warm, living shield in his arms. He found himself cornered in his study by his lawyer and longtime friend Arthur Vance. Arthur was a portly man in his late 60s, with a kind face and sharp, intelligent eyes. He had been the Blackwood family lawyer for decades. "Jonathan, I am so deeply sorry for your loss," Arthur said, his voice filled with genuine sorrow. "Annalise was a rare gem." "Thank you, Arthur," Jonathan managed. Arthur glanced nervously towards the living room where Victoria was holding court, accepting condolences as if she were the grieving widow. "Jonathan," he began hesitantly, "we need to talk about the will and about guardianship." "Annalise and I had mirror wills," Jonathan said wearily. "Everything goes to me. If something happened to both of us, it all goes to Lily in a trust managed by my sister." "Yes, I have the documents," Arthur confirmed. "But Jonathan, that woman out there, she's already making inquiries. She called my office yesterday asking about Annalise's estate, about your prenuptial agreement. She's positioning herself." A cold dread settled in Jonathan's stomach. What is she trying to do? She's building a narrative. That she was your true partner, that Annalise was merely the sickly wife, that this child is as much hers as yours. In the eyes of the public, and perhaps a court, a long-term partner who steps in to raise a motherless child, she could make a claim. Not just on your assets, but on Lily. The thought of Victoria getting her manicured claws on his daughter, on Annalise's daughter, sent a jolt of pure fury through him. This was the moment Annalise had foreseen. Protect her. From her. He excused himself and walked back into the living room, his eyes scanning the crowd until he found her. Victoria was standing near the fireplace, talking to one of his company's board members, a man named Henderson. She was holding a glass of champagne, a small, triumphant smile on her face as she laughed at something he said. The sight of her celebrating amidst the ashes of his wife's life broke something inside him. He walked over his steps, deliberate, his expression grim. The conversation halted as he approached. "Mr. Henderson," Jonathan said, his voice flat and cold. "Thank you for coming." Of course, Jonathan. Anything you need? The man said, patting his arm sympathetically. Victoria turned to Jonathan, her smile widening. She reached out and gently stroked Lily's cheek. She slept through the whole service, such a good little girl. We are so blessed. The "we" was a declaration of war. Jonathan could feel the eyes of everyone in the vicinity on them. This was her stage, her coronation. She thought she had won. She thought the world was now watching her step into Annalise's shoes, the loving partner ready to help the handsome, tragic billionaire raise his motherless child. It's just so tragic, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper for Henderson's benefit. But life must go on. I'll be here for Jonathan and for our little Lily. It's what Annalise would have wanted. We will raise her together and make sure she wants for nothing. The sheer audacity of her words, of her rewriting history in real time, ignited the cold resolve in Jonathan's heart into a blazing inferno. He looked down at the baby in his arms, this perfect, innocent life that Annalise had died for. He looked at Victoria's grinning, predatory face. The time for silent grief was over. It was time to honor his promise. He took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing the attention of the now silent group around them. He looked directly at Victoria, his blue eyes turning to chips of ice. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring quiet of the room with the sharp clarity of shattering glass. There is no "we," Victoria, he stated, his tone devoid of any emotion. And you will not be raising anyone. Victoria's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Jonathan, darling, don't be like this. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Oh, I have never been more clear in my entire life, he countered, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a quiet menace that made the hairs on her arms stand up. You seem to be under a grave misapprehension. You think you can just slide into my wife's life. You think you can lay claim to her home, her memory, her child. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. He looked from Victoria's shocked face to the bewildered expression on Henderson's, then to the other guests, who were now unabashedly listening. He needed witnesses. So let me make this perfectly publicly clear, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. You will have nothing to do with this child, because you have no right. You are nothing to her. You are nothing to me. He then delivered the killing blow, a truth he had guarded, a secret weapon left to him by his wife. This is my child. He held Lily a little tighter, emphasizing his next words with cold, brutal precision. Mine and mine alone. The silence that fell over the penthouse living room was absolute and profound. It was as if Jonathan had detonated a bomb, and the guests were the stunned, silent debris. Every eye was fixed on him, then on Victoria, whose face had gone from confused to utterly incandescently furious. The mask of the grieving, supportive partner had not just slipped, it had been shattered. What are you talking about? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Of course she's your child. She's our child in every way that matters now. Don't be cruel, Jonathan. You're lashing out because you're in pain. She was trying to regain control, to paint him as the hysterical, grief-stricken husband. But Jonathan was implacable. No, Victoria. I think you misunderstand me, he said calmly, his gaze sweeping over the rapt audience. I am not speaking metaphorically. I am stating a legal and biological fact. Annalise, my wife. He paused, his voice catching for a second on the word, the only crack in his iron facade, was not Lily's biological mother. A collective gasp went through the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Victoria stared at him, her mouth agape, her perfectly painted red lips forming a silent O of disbelief. This was a twist she had never anticipated. Her entire strategy had been predicated on a simple, universally understood truth: the child was the product of Jonathan and Annalise. A child that now conveniently for Victoria needed a mother. That's a lie, she stammered, her composure finally breaking. You're lying. You're saying that to hurt me, to push me away. Annalise carried that baby. I saw her. Everyone saw her. Yes, Jonathan agreed, his voice still unnervingly level. She did. She carried her, she loved her, and she died for her. In every single way that truly matters, Annalise was her mother. But you, Victoria, you operate in a world of technicalities, of legal claims and loopholes. So let's stick to the technicalities. The egg that was fertilized and implanted was not Annalise's. Lily shares no DNA with my wife. Therefore, any claim you might delude yourself into thinking you have as some sort of maternal successor is non-existent. She is my biological child. Legally, she is mine and mine alone. Do you understand now? The blood drained from Victoria's face, leaving her with a ghastly pale complexion. Her mind was racing, trying to process this new information and find a way to spin it to salvage her plan. She had built her entire future on inheriting Annalise's life. If the child wasn't truly Annalise's, it changed the narrative. It made her connection to the baby, and thus to Jonathan's world, infinitely more tenuous. An anonymous donor, someone whispered from the crowd. Jonathan heard it and decided to let the truth out, the full, devastating truth. It was the only way to salt the earth, so that nothing Victoria planted could ever grow. Not anonymous, he said, his eyes locking back onto Victoria's. Not anonymous at all. He shifted Lily slightly in his arms and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter. The room watched, mesmerized, as he unfolded it. Before she passed, he began, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, Annalise made me promise to open a box she had hidden in her closet. I opened it this morning. Inside was this letter and a copy of a legal agreement. Annalise wanted me to have it, I think, for this very moment. She knew you, Victoria. She knew what you were capable of. He began to read from the letter, his voice clear and steady. It was Annalise's handwriting, her elegant, flowing script. My dearest Jonathan, he read, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and I am not there to see our beautiful daughter grow. But she is there with you, and that is all that matters. There is something you must know, a secret I have kept to protect us, to protect our family from a shadow I knew would not easily fade. He looked up at Victoria. Her eyes were wide with a dawning horror, a sickening premonition of what was to come. The doctors told us my eggs were no longer viable. You remember the heartbreak. We discussed donors, but I couldn't bear the thought of a complete stranger. I wanted a piece of family, a piece of someone I knew, even if distantly, and I wanted to give someone a chance they might not otherwise have. It was my secret project, my final gift to us. Jonathan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the final devastating reveal. The egg donor, Jonathan, the biological mother of our Lily, was my cousin, a young woman from a small town in Oregon I hadn't seen in years, but whose struggles I had followed. A girl who needed financial help to get out of a desperate situation and to go to college. A girl whose medical history we vetted, whose family I knew. It was all arranged privately, legally, and with the utmost discretion. I paid for everything. It was to be our secret, a foundation of love that no one could ever question. He folded the letter slowly. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. And do you know who that cousin was? Victoria Jonathan asked, his voice dropping to a deadly soft tone. Do you know the name of the desperate young woman from Oregon who sold her egg 5 years ago, long before she reinvented herself in New York? The one who signed a legally binding contract, surrendering all parental rights for the sum of $50,000. He didn't need to say the name. Everyone in the room understood. Victoria's entire history, the one she had carefully curated, the privileged upbringing, the Vassar education, was a lie. She was the small-town girl from Oregon. She was the anonymous donor. She was Lily's biological mother. Victoria stood frozen exposed, the carefully constructed edifice of her life crumbling around her. The child she had viewed as a mere pawn, a stepping stone to wealth and status, was her own flesh and blood. The woman whose life she had sought to steal, whose death she had silently celebrated, was the cousin who had, in a final act of unknowing tragic irony, used Victoria's own biology to build the family Victoria now sought to destroy. The grin was gone. In its place was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and horror. She stared at the baby in Jonathan's arms not as an accessory to her ambition, but as a ghost from a past she had tried to bury forever. Jonathan's declaration, "That's my child," now held a new chilling meaning. He had not only claimed his daughter, he had just exposed her enemy in the most complete and humiliating way imaginable. The story, once uncorked, flowed out like a torrent, washing away the last vestiges of Victoria's carefully crafted persona. It came not just from Jonathan, but from Arthur Vance, the lawyer who now stepped forward, his expression grim. In his hand was a thick file. "What Jonathan says is the truth," Arthur announced to the stunned room, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "I have here a copy of the egg donation agreement signed 5 years ago by one Victoria Lynn Peterson, the name Ms. Vance was born with. It is ironclad. It explicitly and irrevocably relinquishes all current and future parental rights claims or contact in exchange for the agreed-upon sum, which was paid in full by Annalise Blackwood." Victoria, or Victoria Peterson, looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. "No, that's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "The agency said it was an anonymous couple in California. They lied." "No, they didn't." Jonathan cut in, his voice laced with contempt. "Annalise was meticulous. She created a layer of separation, a second legal entity based in California, precisely to ensure you would never know who the recipients were. She didn't want you in our lives then, and she certainly wouldn't want you now. She chose you not out of affection, but out of a strange, pitying sense of familial duty. She told me in her letter she'd heard about your troubles, the debts, the dead-end life you were leading. She wanted to give you a hand up without you ever knowing it was her. A secret act of charity." The irony, he added with a bitter laugh, is that the money she gave you, the money that allowed you to leave Oregon and reinvent yourself, is what put you on the path that led you right back to my doorstep. The full crushing weight of it all landed on Victoria. The money that had funded her new identity, her move to New York, her business degree, had come from the very woman she had targeted as her rival. She had been a charity case. Annalise hadn't been an obstacle to her ambition. Annalise had, in a cruel twist of fate, been its unwitting architect. Flashbacks, unwanted and vivid, assaulted Victoria's mind. A drab clinic in Portland. The sterile paperwork. The feeling of detachment as she signed away a biological possibility for a chance at a real life. She had never given it a second thought. It was a transaction, a simple exchange of dormant potential for cold, hard cash. She had never considered the anonymous couple, never imagined a face for the child. It was an abstraction. Now that abstraction was staring at her from Jonathan Blackwood's arms. Her daughter. The child of the man she wanted and the cousin she despised. The board member Henderson, who had been chatting with her so warmly just moments before, now looked at her with open disgust. The whispers in the room turned from shocked to scornful. She was no longer a tragic, supportive figure. She was a monster. A woman who had preyed on her own family, who had circled her cousin's deathbed with a grin completely oblivious to the fact that the baby she saw as a prize was her own abandoned flesh and blood. "But I'm her mother," she finally choked out, the words tasting foreign and desperate. It was no longer a strategic claim, but a dawning, horrified realization. Biologically. "That has to mean something." "It means nothing," Arthur Vance stated firmly. "The law on this is unequivocal. You surrendered your rights. You are in the eyes of the court a legal stranger to this child. Less than a stranger, in fact, given this signed contract. Any attempt to seek contact or custody would be dismissed out of hand and could even be seen as harassment." Jonathan looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the tempest raging around her. Annalise had done this. With incredible foresight, she had built a fortress around their daughter, a fortress constructed from Victoria's own greed. She had known on some deep, intuitive level what Victoria was. She had seen the ruthless ambition long before Jonathan had. She had seen the girl from Oregon who would do anything to escape her past, and had created a contract that would forever prevent that past from destroying her daughter's future. Annalise's letter had explained it all. She had stumbled upon Victoria's name on a private donor database while doing her own research. At first she was shocked, but then a plan formed. A way to have a child with a familial connection, however remote, and to do a good deed for a cousin she felt sorry for. She never imagined that same cousin would one day be sleeping with her husband. When Jonathan had confessed his affair, Annalise had connected the dots. The name, the ambition, the calculated cruelty. She had kept the secret then, not wanting to detonate a bomb in their already fragile reconciliation. Instead, she had held it in reserve, a final posthumous checkmate against the woman who threatened her family. "Get out," Jonathan said, his voice quiet but absolute. Victoria stared at him, her face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, fury, humiliation, and a strange nascent flicker of something else. A twisted, possessive attachment to the child she had just discovered was hers. "You can't do this, Jonathan," she pleaded, her tone shifting from outrage to a desperate, pathetic appeal. "She's my daughter. I deserve to know her." Deserve? Jonathan's laugh was harsh and devoid of humor. "You deserve nothing. You deserve less than nothing. You stalked my sick wife. You sat in the hospital waiting for her to die so you could take her place. You smiled when she took her last breath. You have shown yourself to be utterly devoid of humanity. The only thing you will ever be to this child is a cautionary tale. Now get out of my home." He turned his back on her, a final public dismissal. He walked over to his sister, who looked at him with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding, and gently handed Lily to her. Victoria stood alone in the center of the room. The guests who a few minutes ago had been offering her their sympathies now stared at her with contempt. They began to turn away, resuming their conversations in hushed, scandalized tones, pointedly excluding her. She was a pariah. Her New York dream built on a foundation of lies, and a secret transaction had just publicly imploded. With a strangled cry of pure rage and humiliation, Victoria turned and fled. She pushed her way through the crowd, her Chanel suit now feeling like a costume for a part she could no longer play. She ran from the whispers, from the pitying and disgusted stares, from the ghost of the cousin who had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave, and from the face of the daughter she would never be allowed to know. The heavy oak door of the penthouse slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing the final brutal end of her ambitions. The aftermath of Victoria's spectacular downfall was swift and brutal. The story too scandalous and dramatic to be contained within the walls of the Park Avenue penthouse spread through New York's upper crust like a contagion. Everyone who had been at the wake had a version of the tale, and each telling seemed to add another layer of villainy to Victoria's character and another layer of tragedy and nobility to Jonathan and Annalise. Victoria became a social leper overnight. Invitations were rescinded. Friends stopped returning her calls. The board at her firm, where her reputation had been built on a shark-like ruthlessness, called an emergency meeting. Her affair with a major competitor's CEO was already a liability, but the public humiliation and the sheer moral depravity of her story preying on her own dying cousin was untenable. She was given a choice: resign immediately with a minimal severance and a tightly worded non-disclosure agreement, or be fired for gross moral turpitude and face a public scandal that would ensure she never worked in finance again. She took the resignation, but her humiliation was far from over. Stripped of her career and her social standing, she became consumed by a toxic obsession with the child she now saw as her stolen property. The desperation that Annalise had once pitied had curdled into a dangerous, unhinged fixation. She began a campaign of harassment. It started with dozens of calls a day to Jonathan's private line, swinging wildly between tearful pleas to see her baby and venomous threats. When he blocked her number, she sent rambling, unhinged emails. Then came the packages, expensive, inappropriate gifts for Lily sent to the penthouse, all of which Jonathan returned unopened. One afternoon, Jonathan's new nanny, a kind, middle-aged woman named Maria, took Lily for a walk in Central Park. She noticed a woman in oversized sunglasses and a scarf watching them from a distance. The woman followed them for 3 blocks. Maria, unnerved, hurried back to the apartment building. As she rushed inside, the woman pulled down her scarf and yelled, "That's my baby, you're a kidnapper." It was Victoria. The doorman had to physically restrain her. That was the final straw. Jonathan, with Arthur Vance at his side, went to court. Armed with the signed donation contract, a mountain of evidence of harassment, and sworn affidavits from the doorman and the nanny, they were granted a permanent restraining order. Victoria was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Jonathan Lilly, their home, or Lily's future schools. She was legally a ghost forbidden from haunting the family she had tried to possess. The legal battle exposed her further. Her real name, her humble origins, the lies she had told on her resume, it all came out. The New York gossip columns had a field day. She was no longer Victoria Vance, the rising star of Wall Street. She was Vicki Peterson, the girl who sold her baby and tried to steal her dead cousin's life. Her fall from grace was complete and absolute. Defeated and ostracized, she finally disappeared, rumored to have moved back to the West Coast, a disgraced woman with nothing but the bitter taste of ashes in her mouth. For Jonathan, the months following the confrontation were a quiet, painful period of rebuilding. He threw himself into being a father with a singular, ferocious devotion. He learned to change diapers to warm bottles, to distinguish between a cry of hunger and a cry of fatigue. He spent hours just holding Lily, rocking her to sleep, singing the same off-key lullabies that Annalise had planned to sing. The penthouse, once a symbol of his shared life with Annalise, was now simply Lily's home. He left the nursery untouched, a perfect sanctuary exactly as Annalise had designed it. But he began to make changes elsewhere. He sold the cold, modern furniture they had bought together in a moment of fashionable whim and replaced it with warmer, more comfortable pieces. He filled the silent rooms with music classical sonatas that Annalise had loved. He found the box from Annalise's closet, the one that had held the fateful letter. Inside, beneath the legal documents, he found more. There were journals she had kept throughout her pregnancy. Page after page was filled with her elegant script detailing her hopes and dreams for their daughter. She wrote about the kind of woman she hoped Lily would become: strong, compassionate, and honest. She wrote letters for Lily to read on her future birthdays, on her graduation, on her wedding day. Reading them was agony, but it was also a kind of salvation. Annalise was gone, but her voice, her love, her spirit was still there, woven into the fabric of their lives. She had left him a roadmap, not just to defeat Victoria, but to raise their daughter. One evening, as he sat in a rocking chair in the nursery with Lily asleep on his chest, he read a passage from Annalise's journal dated just a month before she died. "I have a secret fear," she wrote. "It's a selfish one. I'm afraid this baby will love Jonathan more. He is her blood after all. I am just the vessel, the incubator." But then she kicks, or I feel her hiccup, and I know it's nonsense. Love isn't about DNA. It's about presence. It's about showing up day after day. It's about the hand that feeds you, the arms that hold you, the voice that soothes you in the dark. I will be her mother because I will love her with every cell of my being. And I know, my darling Jonathan, that you will too. Tears streamed down Jonathan's face. Annalise had understood the truth of it all long before he did. Motherhood, fatherhood, family. It wasn't about biology, it was about love. Victoria, with her shared DNA, was the true stranger. Annalise, with none, was and would forever be Lily's mother. He had fulfilled the first part of his promise. He had protected their daughter. Now he would spend the rest of his life fulfilling the second part, loving her enough for the both of them. 5 years passed. The sharp, jagged edges of grief had softened, worn smooth by the relentless tide of time and the consuming, joyful demands of fatherhood. The Park Avenue penthouse was no longer a silent cavern of loss. It was a home filled with the sound of a child's laughter, the clutter of colorful toys, and the scent of freshly baked cookies, a recipe Jonathan had found in one of Annalise's journals. Jonathan Blackwood had changed. The ruthless titan of finance was still there, but he was tempered by something new. He left the office at 5 o'clock sharp every day. He traded hostile takeovers for parent-teacher conferences and corporate galas for trips to the Central Park Zoo. His world, once defined by stock prices and market shares, was now defined by the small, perfect universe he shared with his daughter. Lily Blackwood was a bright, vivacious 5-year-old. She had her father's determined chin, but she had Annalise's eyes, and more importantly, Annalise's spirit. She was kind and curious, with a laugh that could light up a room. She knew her mother through stories. Jonathan told her about Annalise every single day. He showed her pictures, read her the letters Annalise had written, and told her how her mother had designed her room, chosen her name, and loved her more than anything in the world. For Lily, her mother wasn't a sad absence, but a warm, constant guiding presence, a guardian angel watching over her. He never told her the truth about Victoria. There was no need. In Lily's world, her mother was Annalise, the beautiful woman in the photographs with the kind smile. The concept of an egg donor was a complex adult truth she did not need to carry. Someday, perhaps, when she was much older, he would explain it. But for now, he would protect her innocence as fiercely as he had protected her from Victoria herself. Of Victoria they heard almost nothing. Rumors occasionally surfaced. She was in California working in real estate under her old name. She had married and divorced. She was by all accounts a ghost of her former self, a woman haunted by the life she had almost stolen and the child she had unknowingly created and abandoned. She was a footnote in their story, a villain who had been vanquished. One sunny Saturday afternoon in October, Jonathan took Lily to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It had been one of Annalise's favorite places. As Lily ran ahead on the path chasing a butterfly through the rose garden, Jonathan watched her, a familiar ache of love and loss in his chest. Her dark hair flew behind her, and her laughter echoed in the clear autumn air. She was the perfect blend of them both, a living testament to a love that had proven stronger than deceit, stronger even than death. She ran back to him, her face flushed with excitement, and held up a fallen maple leaf, a brilliant splash of red and orange. "Look, Daddy, it's beautiful," she exclaimed. "It is," he said, smiling, taking the leaf from her small hand. "Just like you." He knelt and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood. He thought of Annalise's final words, her desperate plea, "Protect her." He had. He had protected her from the woman who sought to possess her, and he had built a life for her on a foundation of truth and unwavering love. He looked up at the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. He felt Annalise's presence there, in the warmth of the sun, in the beauty of the garden, in the fierce, unconditional love he felt for their daughter. The pain of her loss would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was the little girl holding his hand, the legacy his wife had given her own life to create. Victoria had thought the child was the key to a kingdom of wealth and status. She had been wrong. The child was not a prize to be won. She was a promise to be kept. And as Jonathan Blackwood stood there holding his daughter's hand in the middle of a garden his wife had loved, he knew with absolute certainty that it was a promise he would honor for the rest of his days. The battle was over. The ghosts were laid to rest, and all that remained was the quiet, enduring, and triumphant power of a father's love. This story is a heartbreaking reminder that in the face of tragedy, the human spirit can reveal its darkest greed or its most profound love. We saw a mistress so consumed by ambition, she celebrated a death only to be crushed by a secret she helped create. And we saw a husband's grief transform into a father's fierce, unyielding devotion. He honored his wife not just by protecting their child from a predator, but by building a life filled with the love and memories his wife was stolen from. Their story proves that true family isn't defined by blood or biology, but by the promises we keep and the love we choose to give even after loss. If this story of ultimate betrayal and unbreakable love moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with a powerful message. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama.